Move back. Correct. This could work.
Hi guys, I'm Nata and I'm finding you can see her. She's my trainer. Without further ado, should we start
Art is subjective and is contingent on your talent, and it should be evaluated based on the skills that you display, as compared to scandals on your personality or things that have little to no attachment or little to no relevance to the type of art that you have produced. In opening government, our position is simple. Art should be distinct from the personalities or the history of an individual. This is to suggest that in our world, a couple of things is going to happen. And this, you could suggest this is the policy. So firstly, people are still going to tune in to the music of individuals such as Chris Brown. They're probably still going to very sadly listen to the music of XXXTentacion, sadly, because he passed away. Sad. The second thing is that I think it's reasonable to suggest people would recognize that this person is bad. So people would suggest this person is a domestic abuser. XX was a bad person, but I still enjoy his art and I still enjoy his songs. So people will make that distinction in our world and they will evaluate their art based on it. So in opening government, what are we going to prove? I'm going to prove that there is a separation between both art and the personalities and why that is valuable. And I'm also going to explain the benefits of a separation towards both the artist and the victim. The first argument, why there must be a separation. The first thing that to answer here is why is there a distinction? Art is based on an innate gift that you have, and the intention that you have when you create art is different compared to the scandal or the crime that you have committed. So when you are producing a track, when you're producing an album potentially, there are a couple of things that go through your mind. Maybe it's to replicate your life experiences. Maybe it's to appeal to the most amount of your fans. Maybe it's to give a direct message that has very little representation in mass media. The second thing then is that your intention when committing it is different. When you commit a crime, your intention is potentially to hurt this individual or is to inflict an amount of damage that you cannot quantify. Given that these two things have very separate intentions, this is the first reason as to why they should be distinct. The second thing then is that the purposes are not the same and they are not contingent on each other. So I can draw really, okay, I can't draw very well, but assuming that there is an artist that can, their art is not contingent on the scandal, but rather is contingent on their talent. How much time and hard work they placed into producing a certain painting, how much of training they had pre the scandal, or maybe the type of technique that they use to make their art valuable. None of this is conditional or contingent on a crime being committed. Given that I have proven to you on two levels that the intention is not the same, but secondly, just the pure evaluation of whether they are both conditional on each other, this is why it is principally unjustified to measure the art based on the personalities, right? Notice this is a non-consequential argument. It is valuable irregardless of the outcomes in this debate. Second argument, why is it important to retain a separation of art? The first thing that we have to analyze is that art is incredibly subjective. This is to suggest what is valuable to you may not be very valuable to another person. The problem with the subjectivity is that oftentimes individuals have to find very niche artists that can represent their interests, that can represent the type of experience they want. So Kendrick Lamar and XXXTentacion may both be rappers, but that doesn't suggest that you can enjoy them both in the same way. One speaks about the black struggle, one speaks about the struggle of getting fame and money. Why is this important to know? It is important to know because some fans of these artists have not many other avenues to go towards to get that experience. The problem with focusing and tying art to crimes is that you make fans liable for the actions committed by their artists. And this is bad for a couple of reasons. Firstly, you attach personalities to that art. So what does this mean? It means if I'm a bad person, my art is immediately assumed to be bad, and everyone else that consumes that art is automatically complicit in the crime that I have committed, despite me having very little agency over my artist. I didn't know Chris Brown was going to assault Rihanna. I had no idea that XXXTentacion would commit these things. And there are very little reasons at how I can mitigate it, given that just the wide divide between an artist and me. Like, I'm a regular fella, one country away versus a billionaire that's producing albums. I have little control over this person. Therefore, I should not be attached to or liable for it. The third thing then is that given that these artists go to very unique fields in order to create a very niche market, that kind of work that closely represents your best interest or your life struggles become tainted. So the type of music that you sing, if you enjoy gangster rap, the immediate attachment is that a bad person sung it, as compared to people valuing whether the struggle in that story is being explained. This is why it is harmful to attach the personalities to them, and this is why it is unjustified to do so. So now I'm going to move into outcomes. So let's talk about the benefits of separations. The first thing that we need to contextualize is what kind of artists are we talking about? Who's likely to have a scandal attached to them? So I think it's reasonable to suggest a couple of these people usually come from crime-ridden areas, or maybe these people have traumatic childhoods. Why is this so? More often than not, when they sing or when they carry out a certain action. So for instance, there is a disproportionate number of individuals that support gangster rap and go into gangster rap as a result of the conditions that they were born into. Notice, these are conditions that they did not consent to. You did not consent to being born in a neighborhood ridden with crime. You could not control the fact that you were going to be surrounded by gangs. More than likely, you are conditioned into accepting it. So these people are likely to commit crimes based on the fact of the birth lottery. The problem then is that these individuals usually are minorities. They are usually black artists that have been brought up in areas thanks to Jim Crow laws and suppression laws. What happens then? Their art is immediately not subscribed to because of the attachment that they are bad people. Why is this part or wrong? For two reasons. Firstly, not only do just in general, on a net benefit, you would have less minorities being successful because people don't want to evaluate their art. But secondly, for that one individual in this crime-ridden area that potentially could have used music as an avenue to escape that gang life, they no longer do so. Because notice, in order to keep a scandal going, you have to have the media digging up information about this person to find out about what happened in the crime or the victims that were hurt in this crime. This is hard or harmful for a couple of reasons. It means that the immediate calculus that you have is not to produce good art, but it's whether or not your story is going to be plastered all over tabloids and whether it's going to be exploited. These are two barriers that uniquely exist for minority artists. In the world of government, there's a couple of things that happen. Number one, these artists similarly will not be valued despite the fact that they did not consent to these circumstances, despite the fact that they just genuinely could not control the circumstances they're in. But the third thing is that their art would never become successful, and it has a trickle-down effect to individuals similar to them. Art is subjective, and art is distinct from a person because we can have a separation. For all those reasons, we should pursue the separation of art and personalities.
Side government would like you to believe that it is better for you to support these artists, even though they have been like abusers, but not consider the facts of what actually happens to the victims in itself. That is what we under side opposition would want to protect. We want to protect the victims here and not let the perpetrators get away with their actions, right? Because note that their actions of making these musics are contingent upon it's contingent upon the abuse that they have done along the way, right? Chris Brown would not have some Chris Brown might have been based upon actions that he might have done to Rihanna or some other woman for that matter. So for those reasons, we believe that like we should actually consider the victims as well, rather than just think about the perpetrators are going to be their careers are going to be destroyed. So going on to a few rebuttals, right? They tell you that people will still tune into their music because people will recognize that it is bad, right? But to assume that everyone will recognize that it is bad, you have to actually technically explain to us how is it that they will recognize this thing, right? Sit down. Because you got to understand that some people are blinded by the fame or the ideology at which the person might be believing, right? Like for example, the supporters of Donald Trump support him not because they recognize that he is not bad, but because of the somehow notion that somehow you will support the people, the poor people on the ground, the farmers at the Midwest, rather than actually look at his actions and actually like weigh out whether or not he is good or bad for the country. Sit down, Izzat. So, and then they talk to you about how there should be a separation of arts to action because there will be an intention, because the intention to do damage is non-quantifiable, right? And this is the problem with it, right? Since it is non-quantifiable in the first place, it means that the perpetrators here do not know the severity of the actions in the first place. If you've done an equity violation, you might not think that it's an equity violation. But the thing is, to the victims in itself, it might be considered as equity violation. So because of that, even though it might not be as severe as you might think, because it has affected negatively to another person, that is why you should be reprimanded in that instance, be it through non-consumption of your product. So, but before that, opening.
So would you allow for these artists to still sell their albums or maybe exist on platforms like Spotify or Apple Music?
No, we don't. Because we tell you that because the severity of the actions should not allow them to still continue on their career, right? Because throughout them building up their career or continuing their fame, they have destroyed careers of other people who have worked for them, right? People who have, for example, worked with Donald Trump got their careers destroyed because he was somehow because somehow they were reporting, because somehow they were just following of what Donald Trump was doing, right? We tell you that Donald Trump should be the one who should be isolated in this case and called out in this instance. Sit down, Izzat. So, and then they talk to you about how art is very subjective and there is little control from the viewers, right? It is true that they have little control over what the people do in terms of what type of art they make, right? But we tell you that you can influence in terms of what the narrative should be in terms of the actions that these artists should do. Because watching the works of an abuser or a scandalist means that you are not condemning the actions at which they have done. Meaning that when you do not condemn this, it means that you're actually supporting the actions of it, right? There is no neutrality or a gray line in terms of whether or not you support, or whether or not you should support, or you should or you should not support an artist based on their actions. But before that, yeah, sure, one more.
So when you start demonizing these scandalous artists on your side, how do they become better people on your side then? What does that process look like?
First of all, we actually we consider in some cases you might not be able to fix that person in itself. But we tell you that actually sets a narrative towards other people, potential people who potential abusers or other abusers that might not be reported, for instance, that they should watch out. because they at least it shows to you that where if you do something wrong towards other people, that you will get caught and your career will get ruined, right? That sets a precedence to people saying that your actions do matter and you should choose wisely on what you should do, right? And so going on to a point about how it shows the hypocrisy towards the abuse victims in itself, right? Because the victims go through this abuse based on the pretext or in some cases of career advancement, right? These artists tell them that, oh, if you do this for me or you do this with me, somehow I will somehow give you a push in terms of going up the corporate ladder to getting a higher position, like in that system or whatever it is. So that means is when they report on the abuse that has been done to them, what this means is that they were playing against the fears that are like holding them back all this while. Because of that, we should show them solidarity and condemn the actions of the perpetrators in itself. Because you should say that, hey, this is not your fault, and you actually support them in terms of morality or whatever, and support them in terms of taking action against the perpetrators in itself. Because by you still buying the music of abusers, what it says is that it only shows to you, it shows to the people that it's only just based on optics, right? It's based on actions of being in the moment, of knowing that somebody has been abused. You say, hey, I'm sorry for your loss. I think we stand with you, right? But then again, on the other hand, only a week or 2 weeks later, suddenly you go buy the music of the perpetrator of this victim. What this means is that you're not giving assurance to the victims in terms of what will happen to them. What this means is that first, they will more often than not will not want to report this scandal because no action is being taken to reprimand these abuses in any shape or form. And second of all, it doesn't set an example to potential or other abuse that I have said earlier. For all those reasons, we should protect the victim and not let these perpetrators get away.
Let's call one of
Know that at no point in Leader of Opposition's speech did they engage with our inconsequential argument about why the separation between the art and artist needs to be disproved. Because insofar as opening government can tell you that the art and the artist are two separate entities with separate intentions and separate purposes, the debate about why the artist should be punished is inconsequential. Because it needs to be proven why the art has to suffer as a consequence of the bad decisions or the bad actions that the artist has chosen to embark or do. Right. Before I talk about two extensions in my speech, the first on why suppression of minority art is a trade-off that we cannot make in this debate, and the second about how you make it significantly worse for any victim that they claim to have justice for. And there were a couple of responses to the speaker before me. The first thing they wanted to say, which is also a response to the POI that Navin said, is they're willing to stop at no end when it comes to limiting this person's career. So essentially, they support a world where anyone with any degree of crime or any kind of abuse or scandal will not be able to pursue a career at all. Support, like Spotify or any recording labels, will drop you immediately. To which we heard virtually no response to why it's justified for people who did not never consent to circumstances or societies that socialized them into believing these crimes were actually okay. For individuals who were born in Brooklyn, New York, or like hood neighborhoods that unfortunately was a consequence of Jim Crow laws to suppress you, why the consequences of being born into these neighborhoods has to be borne by these individuals to a degree that to that magnitude needs to be proven in this debate. Otherwise, you literally lock up people who want to create art but have to engage with crime because of circumstances they exist with. But you also create a world where you never are able to use art as a specific platform to be able to highlight the injustices within these communities as well. Like literally, opening opposition's world is one where you never have heard the song "Fuck the Police," or you've never have heard about any Black Lives Matter supporting artists, because all of these individuals, by virtue of there being some degree of crime they've committed, in principle they would not support that. You would disallow those people. They have to tell me why that world, that uniquely disadvantages these artists, is a good world to live in. But notice the second thing they wanted to say is the benefit of the entire case is to set an example for community. So people are able to signal that it's a bad person. Know that it's not a mutually exclusive benefit, because literally under our world, when you view the person and the art as separate entities, you can literally say that this person is a bad person but produces good art. In fact, like this works very well under our case, because you don't punish the art by virtue of coming from a bad person. You punish the person for being a bad person. You hold them accountable for their actions, and you give them consequences that already exist in society. If you're a person who is a sexual assailant who can go to prison or get like people to hate you by virtue of the personality of the person that you are, those are consequences that you already face under our world as well, but not at the expense of the art. So you allow people to be able to uniquely like pursue, or at the very least enjoy that particular art, right? This is specifically important because Navin's argument about pushing that liability onto fans was also never engaged with, because they have to tell me why these fans, why I can't dance to the song, that Chris Brown song, that the Freaky Friday or whatever it is, that good song that plays in the club, because I'm not a person who ever consented to like beating up Rihanna, but I have to face particular consequences. That argument still stands at the end of Leader of Opposition's speech. I have two extensions to my speech. The first on the suppression of the minority art. Like, I think it's important, like I said earlier, they have to have a response to like why these specific artists need to be punished by virtue of circumstances that they were born into. And I extend it by using the analogy, thank you, that Leader of Opposition brought up. Because Leader of Opposition's argument was that if you are a Trump supporter, we will hate you by virtue of being a Trump supporter. Here's why this is bad. Because you create a world where everyone associated with this artist is immediately painted as a bad person, but never actually inquiring why this is a bad person. So you hate a Trump supporter, but you don't hate them for hating his policies or hating his ideologies. You just hate them by association to Trump, which is harmful, because if you view this in the world of art, right, you literally punish record labels for like supporting a certain artist, but like you also punish everyone else who is also associated with that recording label. So this looks like up and coming artists, or this looks like other minority young individual artists who are also associated to that recording label, who never consented to the consequences of that other artist's art, who never whose art is entirely separate from that particular artist's art as well. So you punish another person's art, or you punish another person's being by virtue of association, not by virtue of the ideologies they hate or the philosophies that they actually support, right? In fact, you champion a world where people are able to make the distinction, because it's a better world where you can hold people accountable for their beliefs and the things that they support, right? So the conclusion to this argument is simple, right? I need water. The art is separate, and individuals associated with them should not be hated, because that's just not a good world to live in, because you don't call out individuals for the philosophies that they hate. Before I extend on victims and why you failed them, sure.
How do you punish these artists when the arts are done based on what you said, based on their life experiences, when the abuse that they make is also part of their life experiences?
Okay, you can talk about your life experiences, that you grew up in a black neighborhood, but at the same time, if you are to harm another person, the intention of harming that person is entirely separate. Like, so I don't see why there is an overlap between these two things. But even if it is, the separation of art and artist is important, because you're able to call out the artist as a person. So even if the art somehow overlaps, you can still call out the artist under our world as well. So that's not a unique benefit that lies in this debate. Why you fail victims in this debate? Note that the opposition relies on the assumption that by virtue of hating the art that comes out of this particular artist, you immediately champion the victim and you allow them for a better world to live in. Two reasons why you failed them. The first is, I think for a lot of instances where you support a world that hates the artist, you support the continuous calling out and using of the victim's narrative or the victim's name in the process of shaming individuals to support this artist. This looks like BuzzFeed creating quizzes, or like BuzzFeed creating articles calling out people who hate Chris Brown, or if you support Chris Brown, you're immediately a bad person because Rihanna was the one that was losing out of this. And Rihanna is the reason why, like Rihanna's face is the reason why you should never be able to support Chris Brown in your entire lifetime. This is harmful because you never allow the victim the agency to ever opt out from this victim's narrative, or to opt out, to be able to engage in closure or the ability to process what they've been through. But the second reason why it's harmful is because you force people to openly dismiss victims. Note that opening opposition's world is also a world where people who like the artist are now, who like like the art and realize that the artist is a bad person is forced to say, well, screw the victim lah, I still like the song, because they have to engage it, they have to trade off one or the other. Opening government's world is a world where you're able to say this person is a bad person, but I like the artist. Under their world, if they have to force one or the other, it's more likely that people who have no relation or no form of connection to the particular victim is forced to trade off that victim and say, well, I don't care about sexual abuse victim, or I don't care about someone who lost out in this particular transaction that this artist engaged with. I like the art, screw the victim. That is harmful for the victim because you delegitimize the victim, you don't allow the victim to ever be able to engage with closure because you have an entire fan base that comes after you. The conclusion is simple. Insofar as the art and artist is separate, and insofar as you create a worse world for the victim, that is not a world that we champion, we're proud to propose.
Right. So on the idea of an inconsequential argument and whatnot, right? We won't, like the one that OG tells us about proving to us why art and artists are separate people. I'll try to prove to you why they are the same. They are the same as a whole, right? So the first things first, the artists do their art, right? So basically, this means that the art is a personification of an artist.
Yeah.
OG comes up and tells us that the intention of an individual that's making an art and whatnot, so he wants to appeal to the fan, maybe he wants to write a life story and whatnot, right? It's very different from his intention to conduct a crime of him wanting to hurt his people. But him wanting to hurt his other people is based upon his principal morality, his individual being thinking that it is okay for him to hurt other people. This means that his art is also, he puts his own principal morality within his art itself, right? It is him that is writing the art. You cannot separate the artist from the art that they produce, because every time when you look at Mozart, you look at Beethoven, the moment you hear those music, you will know that those art are a personification of them. They are the representation of what they are. So you cannot separate, like you can separate the art field from an artist, but you are unable to separate an artist from their own individual art. No, thank you. Later, right? So this proves to you that the art that an artist makes or produces, right, is in correlation to the things they do and the lives and later, right? And their lives choices and whatnot, right? So this means that this means, like my first speaker told you, that you're advocating for the crime they do, right? My LO told you about why it's important to the victims for these crimes to not go unreported, for them to be able to stand out and whatnot. But even if it's not from the victim's perspective, right? You look at the perpetrator's perspective, right? What the world looks like on our side. The world looks like this, right? The narrative of you are able to get away with shit you do as long as people support your art. What this means? This means that the society will be able to, like you as an artist, will not see that you're doing something wrong, right? Sure, they tell us that they need to punish us in some form, but there is not enough punishment to these artists to show the world that the actions in which they're conducting is wrong. Even they themselves will think like, I'm doing the right thing. What's there wrong? Because when you look at things like when artists, like for example, we take the Chris Brown scenario, right? When Chris Brown beat up Rihanna, right? If the world still continuously support Chris Brown, like you set the narrative, you set the narrative that it's like to Chris Brown that it's okay for me to continue doing these things because as there's going to be people supporting me, right? I'm still going to make money off these things. I don't have to care or change any form of personality or like follow what the public want to know, right? But then what's worse is the fans that's listening to him or the fans that put him as a role model or an idol or an example to live up to, because they will see that as long as your art is valuable, you are able to do things, because if there are people who appreciate the things you do, no thank you, later. There are people who appreciate the things you do, you are able to continue doing those things, which means that there is no longer, like you are unable to advocate for the crimes or the things that they have done to society. You're unable to condemn for the actions they have done. You're unable to call out to society that, hey, look at this is something that you're not allowed to do, right? Sure, some, like, we bite the bullet on our side. Some fans might not be able to listen to the music and whatnot, right? No, thank you, right? But that's on the assumption that, like, they will say, like, fuck that. Like for example, Rupi came out and tell us, like, fuck that victim. I don't really care. I just want to listen to art, right? That is the extreme case. Like, we can assume that most of the times, like if the person really likes the other person, if the person really likes the other person art, he'll be like, he's a bad person, but I still listen to his song. It's okay, right? That's not mutually exclusive from both sides. There is only the individual narrative to that person because he is able to feel that. But what we are doing this is we are showing the world and everyone else not like accepting that art, like not the minute few that it is not okay to do these things because we are trying to condemn them. Closing.
We don't oppose reporting. We don't oppose criminal prosecution. Given that, can you demonstrate to us at what point there's a huge difference in accountability or assurance to the victim?
I mean, it is okay for you to, like, for example here, okay, so you don't oppose to those criminal actions or whatnot, things like that. But the problem here is that nobody, like the artists or the world generally, are not interested in what goes on within the court proceeding and whatnot, right? Because you're unable to garner any attention. Like, even though the person is a bad person, there's no way for you to know. Even that, like, you know it, but you don't really care about it because, like, nobody is trying to condemn the action they do. Nobody's actively telling you, hey, this is something wrong. Like, you're just like saying that, oh, there's a justice system that exists. I don't really care what the person does. No, thank you. I don't really care what the person does. As long as there's a justice system that exists, we don't have to condemn him and we are continuously support him. This means that after the person, like, if the person, like the artist itself, deems that the punishment that he's going to face within, like, maybe paying a few fines or whatnot is not something relevant, not something important to artists, he'll continue conducting those abuses. He'll continue sending the message to his fans and whatnot that it is okay for you to continue to do these kind of things. And that is what we're trying to prevent from Site LO, right? Site LO. So, in the end of the day, it's basically a utility argument. We're saying it's okay to sacrifice the happiness of a few, like even those minute few friends who are a minority, to tell majority of the world or say to show that it is not that to condemn to show that it is you should condemn these actions within society because yeah, sure.
Yeah, so in our world, you can actively say Chris Brown is a bad person, but Freaky Friday is a good song. And in your world, if you like Freaky Friday, you have to either actively disprove the fact that he's a bad person or delegitimize the victim's experiences. Why is that better?
Like, yeah, even though in our world it's that way, it's bad because we are able to show within society, like you're trying to actively condemn those people and then like trying to prove that not proof. You're trying to show people that it's not something you're supposed to do, and then we're trying to protect the victims themselves because, like what my elbow told you, like yeah, sure, Freaky Friday is a good song and whatnot. If you're able to actively come out and what is it called, condemn those songs, you're able to prove to individuals that this is an example or something that's immoral that you shouldn't and you shouldn't assume things, right? Another thing, like something that OG said in the beginning, I forgot to deal with, was like. They assume that media would stop digging up past histories of those artists itself. They would stop attacking the artists at the point in which people appreciate the art itself. Like this, they didn't prove to us why the media would stop and whatnot. We believe that even in their world, right, the media will still continuously dig up the back past and whatnot. There's still going to be scrutiny that exists within the society itself. It's just that now people appreciate those art, right? So the differences here is that on our world, at least we try to actively condemn those actions and tell people that it is not okay for you to do this. On their world, they will not do those things, and then these actions will still be rampant. With that, proud to oppose.
Thank you.
We think that for the most part, people are rational enough to judge a certain person's behavior. For example, if I think that this person is a criminal, yeah, he's probably a bad person and deserves to go to court or deserves to be prosecuted and go to jail for some time for that rehabilitation process to kick in. For example, I wouldn't say he deserves to be free and stuff just because he beat some people up. Why can I say that? Because I can make a distinction between what he does in his normal daily life and the crimes that he have committed in the past, for example. Okay, so on that note, from CG, we'll point to you that how different the different stakeholders in this debate, because we think that people have been assuming stakeholders when they talk about their arguments. First of all, our first extension will be on the difference between cults of personality that these artists have accumulated in their arsenal, and the differences between that and the regular fans and regular consumers like you and I, who can rationalize their behavior and thoughts. Second of all, we'll prove to you how we can actually prove better accountability on CG side, which was kind of touched by CO as well. CO? No. What's this? Oh my god, I haven't been waiting for a while. Okay, so let's go. Okay, we think that we think that side opposition have yet to prove to us why status quo is not enough for these criminals or these abusers and whatnot. Because we think that if they say that punishments are not effective enough, then it's a problem solution mismatch. Why do you wish that people stop consuming other than wishing that the criminal justice system be better instead? Because that would directly tackle your concern right there on why the punishment is not enough and not effective. So we think that, okay. So the biggest concern coming from side opposition as of now is that it's very hard to separate between the person and their crimes or their art, for example. That people see all of that as one and the same, as one identity. Given that his examples are like Beethoven and Mozart, we think that it's easier to do this now because why? Because we have the internet. I'm going to so say you are an entry-level fan, like you've just discovered this person, this XXXTentacion, 6ix9ine, and all these gangsta rap people. the first thing you always do is Google further, like where do they get inspirations from? Why do their music sound like this instead of like other kinds of music, right? So you go on Wikipedia, you Google around some articles about them, some tabloids, and you find out this person have a lot of criminal records and has been in and out of jail for the past few months or the past few years. So rationally, you would think, wow, this song is a bop, but this person had been bad because he has some criminal records, he beat up women and whatnot. So it's easier to make that distinction when you're an entry-level fan and it's easier to do that now because you have the internet and it's easy for you to like search about all these things and whatnot. So this is where my extension comes in about cults of personality and regular fans and consumers. So this directly clashes with OO's contention how some people are blinded by their idolization towards their artists and whatnot. So we think that these cults of personality, sure, they worship these artists, they blindly idolize them, but the reason why they do that is that they strongly identify with their artists, like how OG has touched on how how listeners identify with the music that these artists create. But we think that this only makes up a small part of this debate. The bigger part of this debate, realistically, are people who are like you and me, who are regular fans, who have just stumbled into this cool music that we saw on our Discovery, Spotify, or whatever. So, for example, so what I mean is that the number of people who are believers are much less than people who are not believers, for example. So this is why it's easy for us to rationalize and judge the actions of the artists and separate them from their art, because at the point of discovery, we know what kind of person they are already. We're not drowned into their coolness of their crimes. So note that this characterization has been missing from the opening debate and only existed when CG came in, which is me. Yeah. Okay. Second, before I go to my second extension, any what's that? POIs? No. Okay. Oh yeah, sure.
How on your alternative of getting a better criminal justice system, how are you gonna get that when you don't regularly condemn the actions of perpetrators in this case?
So that's the thing that opposition has been doing now. They think that just because we consume and appreciate their art, we are also blinded by their idolization. That means that I just told you what's the difference between idolizing them and regularly consuming like what they put out there. So we think that these call-out and criticisms can happen anyway. And then, when tabloids get out, people make police reports about these people. That's where the police comes in and, arrest them for their crimes and stuff. That's how criminal justice system can be better. So better accountability, because opposition say that they want to call out to these artists to show that they're bad people. We think that it's hard for you to do that if people don't consume the things that they put out there for other people, right? So to be able to call them out, from CG we say that these people need to be visible at first. So visibility can only exist when people consume their music, consume their books and the movies that they make, for example. So even though, OG said that some of these artists need media to catapult them to success, to get out of their ghetto neighborhood. Okay. So, but we tell you there's a more important role that the media needs to take, which is to provide visibility to these people who have committed heinous crimes towards people or to the law or to society or whatnot. So we think that when media has put a lot of visibility on them, that's where people can understand and realize that they're not as good of a person that we think. Just because they have good music doesn't mean that they are also good people. So on our side, we have proven that we can get better accountability when you have this visibility on our side. Also, the difference between cults of personality and regular fans, and that most of us are regular fans and consumers, and that we can rationalize and differentiate what is good and what is bad.
You know that if anyone wants to leave the room, please leave in between speeches, not during speeches. It's a foreign.
I think the opening houses have been focusing on like what the effect to the artists are, like what would be the effects of the artists and the victims. But one thing that I think the opening houses have ignored is the intrinsic value of the art, and that's what I'll be talking about later significantly. So, first thing is the two main questions of the debate. First is, should the separation of art and action be there? So the government has really came up and talked about how, you know, that there should be a separation, that there should be a distinction. And the opposition has not engaged that much about that. And we, on closing opposition, we will be talking more about that. So that will make us distinct from the opening opposition. So another question is, will the victors benefit more on the Gulf side or the op side? And we will also be addressing that. So first, we would like to shift the focus to art. And this is one unique characterization that here at Closing Opposition we like to present, is what art is all about. So we on closing opposition, we believe that art is intrinsically a medium for individuals to express emotions and their actions. Why is that so? Because art, the inspiration that comes from actually making this art, it comes from your personal experiences, it comes from your personal feelings that you want to convey through this medium that you are good at. So when art is used by these abusing artists, right, we say that it is quite likely for the art to contain all these hateful messages that they harbor, since they are all these abusing people. Why is that so? Because that when these artists, right, they are actually, when like no normal person with a normal state of mind will actually commit abuse. So actually when these artists, when they are creating these kind of music, right, that we believe that it will contain all these hateful messages that will actually inspire all these hateful acts. And we're going to talk about how all this art, right, it actually, all this art and all these messages, it actually attaches a lot to all the fans. And one thing I also like to say is that opening government has talked, like the government side actually has talked about how, like, you know, the art, people listen to art just for music. But I would like to talk about what art is, like what makes you actually listen to all this art and all this music. The fact is you like art not because of like anything. You like it because you can feel a personal attachment to it. So we believe that when the personal attachment is like formed by all these kind of hateful messages, we believe that it's very harmful. And then first I would like to like go to my few rebuttals. So like, okay, just now the member of government said that the biggest concern is that it's very hard. The biggest concern coming from op is that it's very hard to separate art and the personality. And Gulf said, and then you said that it's easier because of the internet, but we believe that it's actually the opposite. That it's actually harder nowadays with social media and this cult of personality that you're actually talking about. Because artists have formed this cult of personalities. Like, okay, you talk about Mozart, right? Like last time in the like way back, right? People would like just listen to a piano song, yes. But nowadays, when you listen to music, you go on Twitter, you see these people tweeting about all these things, you see all these headlines. It's very hard to separate the actions of all these people and their personalities now. So before that.
So if I'm an artist and I'm a sexual assailant and I make a song about trees, can you tell me about like why your principle of the art always resembles the artist applies in this example?
Yeah, I'll address that in my argument later about how what do you say? How even if the art is not about abuse, that it is still harmful. So another rebuttal coming from another rebuttal is opening government has mentioned that that victims will be used to shame artists, and then the victims can never be able to actually come out of this victimization. So we believe that it's not mutually exclusive of our side, that it can happen on your side too, but we believe that it's much worse on your side when these individuals these fans, like they're using these victims to shame the artists, but they still can support the art that has been made by the person that actually abused and hurt these victims and caused so much permanent damage to them. We believe that's very hypocritical. So, okay, continuing on to my argument about the art. So like we've already mentioned how like it's very likely for all this art to contain all these hateful messages, but then let's take it more often than not, right, that it can actually be the contrary. Like he said, it could just be a song about trees. But let me address to you why that is so harmful. Because like we believe that even if it's not about like all this abuse and all these hateful messages, we are still not accepting it because we believe that in sometimes it's like a form of mockery. How is this so? Because we believe that the artists, right, they cannot separate their actions from the art now, because like what I already mentioned before. So like let's say for example, right, an artist that's been accused of actually abusing women, right, produces a song about empowering women. We will still not accept that, even though it has that benefit of like empowering women. Because why is this so? Because the artist itself is a hypocrite by creating a mockery out of his art. Because the message conveyed by the art has been marred by the actions that directly contradict the message that's contained in the art. So the act of hypocrisy itself is a mockery to women. And why is this harmful? Because we believe that consumers, right, they form a very strong attachment to art. Why? Because people choose, I've already mentioned before how people choose to like or consume art because of the personal attachment. So many listeners, right, they become very influenced by the art, and people love looking into story behind the art. Like, you don't just look at art and look at it. You this is how, like, for example, people know how the story how Van Gogh cut off his ear and stuff like this. Yeah, sure.
So where is the elements of criminality more dangerous? Is it in a world where people just hear it in song and think it's cool, or is it worse in a world where they have to actively suggest that it's acceptable in order to appreciate that art?
Sorry?
Never mind.
Wait, sorry, I don't understand your POI. I'm sorry. If you want, my second speaker can address it. So, okay, so when what happens is that when these people, they form the attachment to the art, right? Nowadays, right, consumers, like, they are becoming very increasingly attached, right? You're actually glorifying the actions of all these abusers, because when you're supporting them, when you're directly supporting them, and you're also directly supporting their actions, like, their actions become legitimized by you showing your support for their art and you consuming their art. And then also, like, we are willing to trade off whatever you say, how they will not be on Spotify, they will not be making anymore, because it is the trade-off to prevent the glorification of these sort of acts. It makes these artists accountable for all their actions to prevent them from doing all this stupid shit anyway. So yeah, for all those reasons, we are proud to oppose. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we call on the government.
Yes.
The second, the objective appreciation of art becomes subjected to the policing of the people. It is then when it dies. What Closing Government brought to you in this debate is, number one, an effective usage of art in order to make the artist more accountable within this debate. But also, number two, the distinction of the people that we are talking about in this debate, and why, because that distinction is important, is because that proves that a lot of the harms of the opposition bench becomes horribly diluted and should not remain relevant in this debate. In this speech, I will examine two different clashes in this debate. The first is whether there is exclusivity in terms of accountability in opposition, and number two, in which world the meaning of the art becomes a lot harmed in this debate. I find myself impressed to be able to analyze those two things, because I really don't care about the arts. Right. Number one, whether there is exclusivity in terms of accountability in the opposition. Opening opposition brought to us how if we ruin their acting careers, we ruin their music careers, we'll be able to assure that they're a lot more accountable and that we can give some assurance towards the victims. Here are the few ways that the entire government dealt with this. Just to remind you that opening opposition is out of this debate. The first is it's hardly impacted for a number of reasons. Number one is simply because a lot of the music that you are talking about is still very much appreciated by their fan base, still very much appreciated by the people who are listening to their music. What this means is that there is no exclusivity under their side in terms of whether we can change the way that the artist behaves in one way or another. I'm simply not entirely sure. The second is that reporting and providing information on the fact that this happens, as well as the existence of criminal prosecution, penalties, and etc., does not die under the world of the government.
What this means is, if your concern is that people don't know much about it, or that people don't think so much about it, we will report about it. We'll tell people Kevin Spacey was inappropriate to a minor. We'll tell about it, that Bill Cosby drugged some women. Then people can make decisions after that. The likelihood of people making decisions that these people are horrible and therefore want them to be in prison, I'll discuss further as closing government's extension. But my point is, there is no exclusivity under that side of the house. In the comparison, and I'll make this comparison later on, is that accountability is actually a lot more likely under closing government. And I'll actually explain that now. And the reason for that is because we've told you that visibility is extremely crucial when it comes to keeping people accountable. And the reason for this is because we want the reach of the story that Bill Cosby was a horrible person to reach as many people as possible. That can only happen if we make these individuals more relevant. That can only happen when the discussion becomes continuous and the discussion becomes overreaching. That can only happen, panel, if we maintain the relevance of the individuals and the music that they produce and the movies that they produce and the art that they produce. And the reason why that becomes more crucial under the government bench is because, very simply, a lot of the attention attached onto an artist, a lot of the attention attached to a musician are all based on the art that they produce, are based on how people find their art attractive, based on how much their art becomes relevant and speaks to them as a fan. If that dies and we continuously stop or actively stop from listening to the music and the art of these individuals, what tends to happen is that they just die off and they become a lot less relevant. That is harmful because the reach that these stories would be towards people in general will become a lot less. That reduces the probability of maintaining accountability because then it all becomes subjected to whether people report about them or not, or whether they become prosecuted or not, which generally is likely, but we think we can increase that likelihood a lot more when people talk about it a lot more, which can only happen when music and art becomes heavily consumed. Therefore, in closing government, we've proven to you that there is a tool that we can use, which is the visibility of these artists, which can only happen if they remain relevant with the art that they produced. Number two, closing note, thank you. Number two, the second thing we've heard, from the entire government bench was that hateful messages. This will sort of sway fans to become evil, something, antichrist, whatever. To which we say the following things. The first thing is that that's a very selective characterization. We generally don't think that the Cosby Show was all about drugging women. We don't think that Kevin Spacey's acting wasn't only on movies that are about being inappropriate to young boys. Generally, people can make the distinction and that people won't necessarily think it's very hateful messages or whatever. But secondly, even if, two responses. Number one, that's a very selective interpretation. What I mean by this is, generally when fans listen to a lot of the messages and a lot of the music that you are talking about, generally hateful messages and etc., we think it's very subjective as to how they interpret those messages as. We think a lot of it stems from people just wanting to listen to the music because it's a nice pop. It sounds very nice. It's very nice to listen to and etc. We think it's very diluted and not necessarily proven ultimately under the bench of the government, under the bench of the government side. But even if we think it's a lot more effective under our side, because even if these messages are hateful, people are more likely to call them out. People are more likely to say, that's a horrible message, and now you have confirmed your characteristics as someone who is horrible. But under closing government, we've proven to you that it becomes a lot more likely because people are talking about it a lot more because these individuals still maintain their cult of personality, still maintain their relevance within the art industry. And that better happens under the bench of the closing government. Yes.
Right, so basically this is a subjective interest versus objective morality. Okay, right? So why should we prioritize in art? What makes it so valuable against, instead of prioritizing in what's objectively right and championing that rightfulness?
Okay, number one, insert principle analysis that opening government talked about. Number two, generally, even if we do prioritize the art and the meaning of the art, the benefit of you wanting to keep them accountable, the benefit of you wanting to have people hate them still maintains at the government bench anyway, because reporting still exists, criminal prosecution still exists, so even you can't really prove any exclusivity under your side of the house. But second, we've also proven to you that because we appreciate the art a lot more, it becomes a lot easier for us to keep them accountable, make it a lot easier for us to prosecute them. So we think appreciating art maintains the principal importance that opening government talked about, but also maintain the practicality that we wanted to fight for under the government bench. Last but not least, they say that there will be, under closing government, there will be personal attachment towards the art, and that's something that's very harmful. To which we say that, yes, we will admit that there will be some people who will be very personally attached towards the art because people love the music and people love the artist. But what was not proven is that this will make the artist infallible, that this will make the artist a lot harder for us to prove that they are horrible people, to which we say wasn't necessarily proven. Reason being because people can make the distinction, and this is where the extension of the difference between casual listeners and core personalities come in. Most of the listeners that we're talking about are casual listeners who can make the distinction that this was horrible. I like your music, but you were a horrible person. And if that remains true under the closing government, then this entire argumentation about personal attachment becomes less relevant. The entire opposition bench dies in this debate. We're very happy to propose.
Very much, and I'd like to follow on.
Bye bye, everybody.